Welcome to Common Sense Citizen, the podcast where we cut through the noise to tackle LA's biggest challenges. We bring civic leaders, elected officials, and solution-driven activists together to expose hard truths, break down the systems that shape our lives, and forge a common sense path forward. Powered by Thrive LA, we're here to boost civic participation and make LA a place where everyone can work, play, live, and thrive. This isn't just a conversation, it's a movement. Let's get to it. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Common Sense Citizen, a podcast of Thrive Los Angeles. I'm here with Sam Yebri, where we discuss the critical issues facing Los Angeles and the state of California today. Today we're talking to Paul Webster of the LA Alliance, who's been a critical fighter on the forefront of the homelessness issue here in Los Angeles, discussing LAHSA, discussing the failures of the system, discussing how we can solve it, a recent court decision that came out, and kind of the way forward for Los Angeles homelessness.
And today we're going to talk about how our homelessness system in Los Angeles is built, how the money is being spent or not being spent, who's in charge or no longer in charge, and what are the next steps to fix this broken system where so many people are suffering on our streets.
We hope, especially if you want to learn more about homelessness, want to learn more about the issues behind the issues, right? What's behind the encampment that you walk by every day. Paul's going to give us a really great in-depth understanding of exactly how that works, how we're going to solve it. So, Paul, tell us a little bit about the LA Alliance, how it was formed, and maybe a little bit about your background.
Sure thing. Great. And thanks for having me on. The LA Alliance was formed in 2019 by a group of Los Angeles residents, business owners, and even some people that were experiencing homelessness. And it was formed because these people were just tired. They were fed up with essentially getting pat on the head by their city council members and by, at the time, Mayor Garcetti, because these complaints that business owners and residents have in Los Angeles, they're not new. These are things that have been going on for decades, right? And it's like, hey, how come you're allowing an encampment to set up next to my business? They're creating fires. They've got trash everywhere. My customers are complaining about being harassed. If, I own a restaurant and there's people that are clearly untreated and unhoused, harassing my customers in the restaurants. I don't feel safe when I go to the grocery store. My kids, I'm taking it to ballet class and there's an encampment with filth and trash and needles. These complaints aren't new. And so we basically formed a little group to basically say, how can we move past the patronization of our city council members who, classically you're supposed to go to your city council member and say, hey, here's a problem. Can you fix it? We wanted to move past that patronization. We wanted to move past the inaction of the mayor. So, think of your old 10th grade high school civics lesson, right? You got the legislative branch, which the city of Los Angeles is the city council members. You've got the executive branch, which is the mayor. And we have the judicial branch. And so we went to the judicial branch because following that 10th grade civics lesson guidebook, you can go to the courts to, redress your grievances, right?
And in LA, there's an old joke that the only way to make progress is through a ballot proposition or in the courts, right? Because the executive and the legislative branches are worthless in Los Angeles for a long time. And actually, that's why we started Thrive, which we'll talk about as well, is to bring change at the ballot box, because we can't rely on the courts and now possibly prosecutors to do the job of our mayor and city council.
We found a tremendous couple of lawyers who were willing to take on this monumental case. We went to federal court because we didn't want to just, go to civil court and basically say, look, we got a problem with this encampment, and the city will say, oh, we'll clean it up and it's all done. We wanted to make groundbreaking complaint and seek groundbreaking action. And so we went to federal court. We filed a lawsuit against the city and the county of Los Angeles. And basically what we were complaining about is that by the city and the county failing to do the job that they're given to do, which is provide basic services like clear rights of way, cleaning up filth and trash, helping the indigent if they're untreated and unsheltered. By failing to do that, they were creating what's called a state-created danger. they were making it more difficult to live in the city and the county of Los Angeles. So we filed that lawsuit in 2022. We settled with the city of Los Angeles. And in 2023, we settled with the county of Los Angeles. And those settlements were very important because for the first time in forever, I think, the city and the county actually were committed to, by a third party, to specific metrics and milestones that they themselves committed to. So the metrics in terms of creating new beds from the city was 12,915 new beds to get people off the street. The commitment from the city was to reduce the number of encampments, not to just clean up and let people, repopulate, but to actually remove 10,000 homeless encampments in the city. And the commitment from the county was that they would not only create 3,000 additional beds to treat people with mental illnesses and substance use disorders, but that they would also come alongside the city and make sure that those 12,000 plus beds that were being created were sufficiently serviced with the county's, public health, mental health, substance use, et cetera, et cetera. So those were the things that we really, we basically wrote it out in a settlement agreement. All parties signed, and so.
And it's worth noting, Paul, that wasn't easy. You make it seem like you filed your lawsuit and you got to a settlement agreement. Yeah. It was nothing like that. The optics of a federal judge, David Carter from Orange County, war veteran, hailing in Mayor Bass to a federal courthouse, forcing the supervisors to show up, answer questions, and they probably in their lives have never been spoken to the way that Judge Carter spoke to these powerful politicians, and then force them to go to Skid Row and walk these streets with him and answer the question, why are 7 people who are homeless every night in the city of Los Angeles dying while we're spending an unprecedented historic amount of money, upwards of over $2 billion a year at the county level. And there was no answer. And I commend you for taking the lead on this, because this could not have happened any other way, sadly.
Well, we appreciate it. That was our hope. I think, to your point, Sam, probably one of the most pivotal moments was when Janice Hahn and other members of the County Board of Supervisors were in court, and essentially Judge Carter wrote on a piece of paper, "This is the commitment that the county is going to make. Will you sign it?" And Supervisor Hahn kind of looked at her attorneys and looked at the court and looked at the paper and kind of signed it. And it was this classic kind of political theater. But that was how this deal. And I would have to say, we at the LA Alliance, we started creating a lot of conversation in the community through social media. So we put together some really effective and very targeted social media posts that basically pressured the city council to commit to something, pressured the county. Our back channels, when we started running some of these social media posts, was that it was creating a lot of buzz in City Hall and in the County Board of Supervisors. So we were able, as just kind of this, nonprofit advocacy and education organization, to get under their skin and get them to do what we wanted them to do. And we've continued to use social media very effectively to get our message out and to talk to people in Los Angeles about this really complicated but really important issue.
I think, with a lot of issues, I think this demonstrates how there's so much frustration in the general population, but I think most people don't understand really the level to which local politics works, county level politics works. For our listeners who maybe aren't as adept and understanding, the systems here, could you just give a brief cursory overview of what is LAHSA? What does the county do? What does the city do? What does the state do? And kind of how does it all work in concert? Because I think a lot of people, what they don't realize is, just as one example, right? The money we approved as voters for the city for Measure H, to create housing was also doubled down by state taxes that we pay and county level, county and city and federal government money, right? So it's not even that our, $2 billion is supposed to build 12,000 units. It's maybe $6 billion that's supposed to build 12,000 units, right? And we're just voting on that small portion of it. Or maybe the way that spas work, right, in the city of LA. Could you just give some kind of a, cursory understanding so that the people following along can understand what systems are in place before we, bury them over the pod?
It really is kind of the classic, the classic method is follow the money, right?
Right.
So every community in the country receives money and has received money for decades from the federal government to address homelessness. And they've done this usually through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who I worked as a senior policy advisor for a little while. And they do it through HUD. And then what happened in 2009 through about 2013, Congress passed a new way for communities to get funded to address homelessness. And what they did was they created these consortia that they called continuums of care. And so instead of the federal government sending money directly to program providers, they sent money to these continuum of care consortium, and those continuum of care said, okay, we're going to divide this money out. So just right around the same time, because of this kind of long-standing battle between the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles, they're always bickering about who pays for what, who's responsible for what.
And Paul, I think it's worth noting, right, the city of Los Angeles, other cities nearby, whether it's Pasadena or Culver City, they're in charge of the housing piece. And they have Prop Triple H and other funding sources and their own budget. The county and these cities, with the exception of Pasadena and Long Beach, there's no health department. So the city of LA cannot provide mental health services, public health services, even though perhaps the fire department does that, more than half of its calls every day, right? And then the county of LA, this massive budget, 40 billion, 10 million people, is supposed to provide the services, the mental health, public health, and they're at odds. And it took your lawsuit to get them in the same room to actually talk, to commit to things. So,
but it also creates a structural excuse for them, to be able to point fingers at each other.
The history is that whether it's water, whether it's whatever is going on, there's always this constant battle. So in the I want to say it was around 2016 or so, actually it hadn't been before that, the city and the county entered into a joint powers authority to create this entity called LAHSA, Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, so that the money from the state of California, the federal government, the city, and the county would go into this one organization. And that one organization would then not only divvy the money out, but also coordinate activities. So you've got federal money coming in. Remember, around COVID, we had huge amounts, Project Room Key, Project Home Key, coming in from the state of California. There are different requirements for all of these monies. We have Triple H, which was the bond, $1.3 billion bond that went to create permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles City, Los Angeles County. And then you had Measure H, which was the services component. So to Sam's point, you had the city doing the building and the development and the county providing the services and the support. That was supposed to be the package. And so, and let me just tell you just the context of this. In 2019, President Obama said, because he was so thrilled with this new kind of implementation of this federal policy and the way that states like California were getting on board, the way that Los Angeles was getting on board to essentially tax themselves $1.3 billion to create development. He claimed that by 2023, homelessness would end in the United States. That was the claim. It was repeated by the National Homelessness Advocates. I remember seeing a video with Mark Ridley Thomas as Measure A or Measure H passed, how this was going to end homelessness in Los Angeles. So the promises were huge. What were the results? Well, this is kind of what I always tell people is I say, whether you're looking at the state of California, the county of Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, or nationally, we have more money than ever, more money than the history of the United States ever, dedicated to providing homelessness housing, homelessness services, whatever. We've got more money dedicated to that than ever. We have more capacity than ever. What I mean by that is we've got more permanent supportive housing. We've got more navigation centers. We've got more outreach workers. We've got more mobile showers, you name it. We've got more than ever, but we've seen more homelessness. In fact, in January of this year, HUD released its annual homelessness assessment report that showed that since 2005, when HUD started actually counting when homelessness, counting through the point in time count, there is more homeless people, more people experiencing homelessness, more unsheltered homeless, more chronic homeless than ever before. So, to your point, in my view, what I see, the thing that has grown the most is the budgets of these NGOs that purportedly provide this service, and the amount of money that the bureaucrats are receiving to essentially continue these processes that do not result in a decline in the number of people on the street. And so,
which is why your lawsuit was so important, because until Judge Carter and the LA Alliance uncovered the fact that 2.3 billion of the 2.8 billion that was spent recently in homelessness was unaccounted for, there were no receipts. Imagine any business providing that kind of metrics. If an auditor asked, hey, or the IRS asked, show us your receipts of what you're spending your money on, and there were none. They came up empty. So it is imperative that we as Angelinos pay attention now, because we've been sold a lot, to your point, a lot of promises. Out of the goodness of our heart and our generosity, we've continued to vote in overwhelming numbers to tax ourselves or pass bonds, Measure H, now Measure A, Prop Triple H. So this is not a resource issue. This is not a money issue. This is a leadership and public policy issue, because the approaches aren't working. And to your point, the only thing that's actually increasing is the massive budgets of these nonprofits and this ecosystem of organizations. They could be well-intentioned, they could be trying, but they're just not doing their job. So it's time to pivot. So I again want to commend you, Paul, and the LA Alliance for saying it's time to pivot, because folks in government aren't willing to admit that they've been failing.
Absolutely. I mean, I also think, within maybe our community of people who are super civically engaged, we saw this report and our eyes completely just shut open. But I don't think it's getting enough attention, frankly. And I'd love to hear, Paul, from the horse's mouth, what did this report essentially uncover? I mean, one thing that we heard from Sam is obviously we have no receipts for, the vast majority of the funds. Another thing we spoke about kind of earlier was, we have actually no proof that the units that they claim to have built even exist necessarily, right? Based on the expense report. But if you could just give us kind of a summary of, the report that we got from LASA that Judge Carter released, recently, yeah. I'd love to hear it.
So real quick background is last year we filed a motion with the court saying, look, the city's not doing its job. The county's not doing its job. We want to sanction the city, $6 million, because there needs to be a price paid for their inaction and their failure to abide by our settlement agreement, which essentially is helping people get off the street, get the services and treatment that they need, and cleaning up the streets. That's what we complained about. The judge was not comfortable in sanctioning, the city or the county at $6 million, to the tune of $6 million. So instead he said, we've never had a full-scale audit of what's going on the city's homelessness programs. So let's do that first. So the court hired a third-party independent outside contractor. Wasn't the city controller, wasn't anybody at the county, a completely independent firm, Alvarez
one of the
and
top
Marsal.
One of the top firms in the country that provides these types of audit services for corporate America.
They're no stranger to auditing things and getting down to the bottom of this thing. So they released their audit report a few months ago, and it was just a bombshell. So Here's what it said. Just about five things, I think. What it says is that this city has spent about $1 billion, $934 million, in this one program to get people out. Remember when there was a big news story how Judge Carter ordered the city and the county to get homeless people out from underpasses and overpasses near freeways? That program was called the Roadmap program. We spent almost $1 billion on the Roadmap program. And LAHSA, who is supposed to be coordinating and basically providing the finances for these kinds of programs, they're contracted with providers for $455 million in services, but added another 25% for a total of $608 million. And they didn't properly reflect how the money from different funding sources was used. And the problem with that is that because it doesn't accurately reflect the Roadmap program's cost, we don't have any measurability. We can't measure if the city and LAHSA actually knew what their programs cost. And it meant that the city couldn't make informed decisions about the cost effectiveness of these programs. Something else that the audit found out was that, the city committed $1.1 billion to support 132 permanent supportive housing projects under our alliance agreement. But the city is spending an average of $8.3 million per project. And the accuracy of the data associated with that cost is very sketchy. So nobody knows exactly where the money is going and what it's producing with respect to the programs, these 12,000 beds that were supposed to be created by the city because of our alliance settlement.
Paul, how much of that is permanent supportive housing versus transitional housing? Because I think almost
all of it is permanent supportive housing. So it's a great question, and This is one of the big debates from the 2009 changes in Congress. When Congress changed the way that they funded community-based homelessness programs, what they did was they really prioritized, they put a lot of emphasis in permanent supportive housing as opposed to transitional housing. Transitional housing was historically one of the best values and best ways to help people experiencing homelessness. And the reason it was because it was very easy to track the money. The program that the federal government implemented across the country was called Shelter Plus Care. And that program provided a per diem in terms of housing costs and a per diem in terms of services costs. So if you were a project, you knew kind of generally, okay, we're doing pretty good because we're able to meet our housing budget, we're able to meet our service budget, and we're able to manage it that way. In 2009, the way that Congress reformulated the dollars and how these communities would be provided money from the federal government, which in fact were duplicated specifically here in California by the state of California. So the state of California basically took that federal program and said, we're going to adopt all the same priorities for permanent supportive housing and low barrier shelter in the state of California with state dollars. So they doubled down on that reform. And basically what that meant was that if you were a transitional housing provider, if you used this per diem for housing and this per diem for services, and you were really focused on getting people sober or getting people into work programs or getting people, to address some of the behavioral issues, you had to shift over into permanent supportive housing, which is a very different model from transitional housing.
I think also, when you look at transitional versus permanent supportive housing, I don't think some people can really think through kind of the implications of that. And one of which being, as I see it, permanent supportive housing, it's a longer term solution. It's way more costly per person, and it creates sort of a permanent state of care, right?
Dependency.
Dependency, exactly. And I think transitional housing, way, way, way lower cost per bed, a lot more immediate effects, right? If our goal, as you mentioned it, the goal of the Alliance is quality of life issues for the average citizen, and, basically cleaning up our streets so that everybody can enjoy them. Transitional housing is a model that quickly gets people off the streets, gets a lot more people off the streets for a lot less money, and doesn't really focus too much on the long-term dependency, but more so of up funneling, right, and upcycling people back into society where they can kind of get an apartment, take care of themselves, reunite with family, get sober. Right. And the permanent supportive housing model, in addition to that, is sort of a multi-year black box of money where it takes maybe 4 or 5, in California sometimes 7 or 10 years to actually build an apartment unit, all the while you're funding it and you're not seeing results, right? Versus, I think the city of LA during COVID, if I'm not mistaken, in South LA, south of downtown, they rented or they bought like a massive warehouse. They put a bunch of beds in there, and I think they got like 2,000 people off the street in a matter of like 30 days. Yeah. Right. And I think it's a very, very important distinction to make, the transitional versus permanent supportive housing. Yeah. It's an argument of where our morals are on one hand, but I definitely think that the morality argument has really been used as a way to harness the conversation towards more and more funding. So with less and less accountability.
The analogy is, right, if I told you tomorrow 80,000 Angelenos are going to be homeless, natural disaster, war,
FEMA style,
right? There would be an immediate response. Let's get them indoors, sheltered somehow, somewhere, wherever there's available land, right? But that's the crisis every single night in Los Angeles. And of those 80,000, every night 7 people are dying. Yeah. Right. Addiction. Yeah. Or exposure and other health issues. So there's the complete lack of urgency. And I think the morality point is just not compassionate or humane to allow people to continue to wither away and die in our streets while we're expecting a perfect response, right? Brand new construction in every different part of town is just not feasible. But we cut you off, Paul. You had a couple more points of what the audit report.
Want to say the easiest way to understand the distinction between transitional housing and permanent supportive housing is that transitional housing typically is used by some community-based organization whose motivation is to transform people's lives. I want to take you from being an addict to being sober. I want to take you from coming out of prison to being engaged in the community again. I want to take you from being somebody who is marginally able to stay stable with their mental illness and get you stable on your drugs, maybe long-acting. The issue is really building into people. And they say, look, we're going to try 3 years to do this. The difference, what happened when Congress changed the way that they funded communities is they said, we want you to stop transforming people's lives and being a program provider. We want you to be a landlord. Yep. And what that means is that you can't tell people what to do. You can't require sobriety in your programs. You can't require workforce training in your programs. You have to treat people like tenants. And so what happens is then the housing gets way more expensive. The services go way down. And you basically have, kind of Ryan, what you were saying, this cycle of dependency that now I'm just a disabled person in an apartment receiving a government subsidy, and I can stay here for as long as I want, whether my behavior improves, whether my health improves, whether my sobriety improves, any of that stuff.
And that unit essentially has been given to someone for 30, 40, 50 years, right? Versus the traditional model that one unit, one $850,000 unit should not just be helping one person for their life. It should be, a tool to help hundreds of people through years.
Yeah. So some of the other findings in the report were really quite, they're rather technical, but they're important. For example, there was a big review of Inside Safe. Inside Safe is the Mayor Bass's signature program on homelessness. She used city money, a lot of this, to do this because she wanted to get people off the street and into essentially motels and then provide them services within those motels. Very expensive model is what we found, is that the cost to date is something like $367 million. And the number of folks that were housed to date is something like 878 clients. I mean,
and not to be cynical.
And of those people, how many of them are back on the street or passed away or lost, right?
Well, yeah. So that was another thing that what we're finding, not reported in this audit report, but what we're finding in other reports. In fact, the city controller, Kenneth Mejia's report, is that usually we're about a 22% successful in getting people off the street into some kind of permanent housing, some kind of, just get them off the street. It's about a 22% success rate getting people off the street.
1 out of 5.
The problem is about 50% of those people, once they get off the street, go back to the street. Yep. So you've really got only about a 10 to 12% success rate of getting people off the street and actually remaining off the street. And in the meantime, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars of these programs. And I want to go back to, I think, a point that Sam brought up. This is a leadership issue. Why is it a leadership issue? Because when you've been investing for 5 years, 8 years, 10 years in a program that shows this kind of success rate, 10%, 12%, I'll even give you 20%. That means that you've got an 80 to 90% failure rate. So what are we going to do as a leader? What are we going to do to rejigger this thing? Now listen, elected officials, they got a lot of pressures on them. They say, well, I can't rejigger this thing too much because this is the only thing that the federal dollars or the state dollars pay for. Well, then you know what? I like to throw grenades. I work for an organization that sued the city and the county. I'm not afraid to say, then get off your ass and go to the state and go to the federal government and say, this plan ain't working for us. We're Los Angeles. We're one of the largest cities in the country. We have the largest population of unsheltered people in the country. This ain't cutting it. But that's not what we got.
So let's dig into that for a second, because I think it's a really important point, because we assume our leaders are going to do the hard things and the right things, right? But let's say Mayor Bass or Garcetti, whoever it was, to do that requires them to look at the donors that they have in the eye. And if you look at the donor files of who's giving to these politicians, there's significant numbers of executives and employees of these NGOs are direct donors to these politicians. And then you got to look at their allies politically. So it's no surprise that Mayor Bass appointed to be the CEO of LASA someone who was the CEO of one of the agencies, right? She did not appoint someone who's from outside this world, not someone who is going to come in and ruffle feathers, but someone from St. Joseph's who will just continue the same approach. And we see it's not working, right? So there is this conflict of interest. Some people call it waste, fraud, and abuse, corruption. But
the homeless industrial complex.
There is no incentive, right? There is no incentive for the organizations to solve the crisis. There is no incentive for the politicians to solve this crisis while people die. In fact, the longer the crisis goes on, the worse it gets, more money flows into it from the federal government, the state government, and from the voters of LA City and County. So something needs to break that cycle. And that something right now is the Alliance. And so let's talk about the shoes that have dropped recently, Paul. The CEO of LASA resigned in disgrace because of her failures and her conflict of interest, where she's personally electronically signed a $2 million contract to the organization that was ran by her husband.
After making $500,000 a year.
After she made $500,000 a year. The county just pulled hundreds of millions of dollars from LASA because of your audit and because of their failures. There's now a potential receiver that the federal court Judge Carter may appoint to take over some or significant numbers of the duties of our mayor and our board of supervisors in terms of how this money is being spent. So some change is coming. So I wanted to get your take of where we think we're going as a city and county, what the next steps are, what's promising, and how because some folks are more cynical will say, we're just moving around the chairs on a Titanic. This is a sinking ship. This is too little, too late. And none of these reforms are going to be in place soon enough to actually help people who are suffering on our streets.
And let me just add, so Sam, that was a great list. Alicia Adams Kellum had to resign. She saw the writing on the wall. She said, this sweet gig is over. So she resigned. We're seeing Judge Carter basically threatening receivership. And people need to understand, receivership is basically the court is stepping in and taking over the management of this important function of homelessness programs, homeless spending, things like that. The model for this was in Plata versus Schwarzenegger, which was a case with the California prison system, where a receiver came in and took charge of the healthcare system because the grand jury found that the state wasn't adequately providing for the healthcare of people in state prisons. And so somebody else was appointed to manage that. We're looking at the same thing here in California. And breaking news, just to add to this litany of potential consequences, on my phone, I just got this press release from the newly appointed United States Attorney General Bill Asalee. He's announcing a criminal task force to investigate fraud and corruption involving homelessness funds. Wow. I mean, that is big, big news. And this is one of the things that, we were concerned with, we were worried about in the LA Alliance, because essentially, going back to this audit report, the city doesn't know where its money is going. LAHSA can't show records of where these public funds are intended to go. They have contracts that are essentially, open-ended. It's kind of like, just send me an invoice and I'll pay it. And,
they're paying up front and never getting invoiced.
It is millions of dollars where
unbelievable.
People aren't recouped. I went to Washington, D.C. A few weeks ago and met with the Secretary of HUD. And I said, you got to understand Los Angeles' homelessness system is a dumpster fire and something needs to be done. So my hope is, based on the federal court's action, Now let's talk a little bit about the county, right? I don't really have kind words to say for the county.
Nobody really knows. I don't think the average person, maybe over 50% probably don't know who the county supervisors are in LA, but they have so much power in a lot of instances more than the city. And their budget is way bigger and just a way bigger effect on this whole system.
And so the county is important because what does the average Angelino see? What is the face of homelessness for the average Angelino? It is a mentally ill, substance addicted individual living in squalor on the side of the road somewhere in Los Angeles. I don't care if you don't have to be in Skid Row. You could be in Los Feliz. You could be in Hollywood. You could be in Santa Monica. You could be, anywhere. You could be in the Valley. You've got sections of town where you've got folks that are living desperate, deplorable lives in third world conditions. That's what's going on. The county receives hundreds of millions, billions of dollars from the state to take care of what are called indigent people who are poor, who've got bad health. I mean, and we're talking about people who are chronically addicted to methamphetamine and fentanyl. This is a regular, people need to understand, this is a regular occurrence on the streets of Los Angeles, in downtown, on the west side, where you've got people in undress, walking around filthy, dirty, screaming obscenities, screaming at people, waving things. This is the kind of destitution that, when you don't meet the need, happens.
In a lot of states, when someone is in that dire strait, they get conserved. They're conservatorship laws that the state comes in to save that person's life, right?
That's right.
California's laws have made it very difficult to do that.
Right.
There's some effort to reform the Lanterman Act, conservatorship law. You basically have to be gravely disabled or a threat to yourself or someone else. You have to be on the verge of killing someone else or killing yourself almost to be conserved, right, to be saved by the state, which is a big part of this conversation. And I just wanted to at least touch on it today, because mental health reform, I think, is a necessary component of any serious, sober conversation about homelessness, because you can build all the housing in the world.
Yep.
Right? You can build 2 units of housing for all 80,000 people who are homeless. But if folks are not getting the mental health services they need, people are still going to continue to die on our streets.
And I think also, for some reason, it's been billed over the last, call it 5 years plus, as a lifestyle choice. And how dare we come and intervene in someone's lifestyle choice? And, we've gone to call some of these homeless encampments have been called integral communities that are in our city, right? This is not the type of community we should be fostering.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I think it's really important. And I'd add to my list from a moment ago, another promising tool, a promising development is the U.S. Supreme Court's clarifying the Boise decision in this Grants Pass case in June of 2024, basically saying that cities, counties can enforce anti-encampment laws even if there's no shelter available. Before, cities would say, hey, you know what, until I have housing, they misread the Boise decision. Unless I had housing available, we can't move someone off the streets. Or if I don't have shelter. And responsible leaders in California are taking the lead on this. Matt Mahan, the mayor of San Jose, says, you know what, we're going to offer you shelter 3 times. And if you're going to say no to 3 offers of shelter, then we're going to require you to get off our streets. And he's starting with freeway on-ramps and overpasses, and he's focusing on parks and schools, and he's slowly taken over these encampments and making it no longer an option to live on our streets. And the politicians now can no longer hide behind this federal court decision. But the city of LA, going back to the point of the leadership, has not made the leadership decision yet. And it's incumbent on Thrive, on LA Alliance, and everyone who's listening today to require and demand that our leaders in Los Angeles follow the lead of San Jose.
That's right.
Use the tools provided by the U.S. Supreme Court to save people on the streets before it's too late.
And I think another part of this conversation on the city level, and not to sidetrack whatsoever, but I think there's been this conversation, this tension between different factions within the city council about the anti-camping ordinance around schools and parks. Paul, if you want to give just a little bit of a overview of that and kind of where you see that conversation going as well.
Yeah, so appreciate it very much. So 4118, which is the city ordinance that prohibits sleeping, lying, and camping on city public property, has been neutered. And what the city council did is they did a couple things that are just kind of ridiculous. First, they said, well, look, if you in your city council district want to create a little safe zone around daycare centers or schools or libraries or things like that, you can do it. But we, the city council, have to approve the areas in your district that you want to make safe, anti-camping zones. So it's basically you as a city council member can't meet the needs of your own city council district because you've got to rely on the other 14 members of the city council. Absolutely ridiculous. The other thing, there was a provision in our settlement with the city that said if a city council district can reduce the number of homeless encampments can meet the shelter needs of 60% of the people that are living on the streets in your council districts, then you would be able to use 4118. You won't have to rely on the rest of the city council in order to enforce anti-sleeping and camping zones without these zone permits. And they neutered that. They stripped it out. So to your point, Sam, there is no incentive to clean up encampments in the city of Los Angeles. And in fact, drives me absolutely crazy. So I know a number of folks, talk to a lot of businesses all over the city. I have some really good relationships in Highland Park. And Eunices Hernandez is the council member in Highland Park. I cannot tell you how many individuals, emails, phone calls, conversations the citizens of CD1 have had with Eunices Hernandez to clean up homeless encampments, to do your duty as a city council member, and she has sat on her hands and given them excuses. It is absolutely unconscionable.
And she's up for re-election in June of 2026.
And I think that's a perfect sort of contrast. You look at that versus like the trajectory in Venice, right? Venice, historically, in the last, call it 5 years ago, was really one of the most dangerous places where encampments were growing, needles were growing, hate crimes, violent crimes were all growing in Venice. And they've really, really switched roles. And you kind of see, on the city level, how important it is, on the district level, on the, council district level, how important it is, right? You have someone like Tracy Park in CD1, super compassionate, problem solver, works to, get these issues kind of under control. And you see public safety, health, housing, all that kind of stuff is going in the right direction. A place like, Tracy Park's district versus CD1, which actually, kind of had a handle, right? They were building the most permanent supportive housing. They were, doing all this kind of stuff. And over the last 4 years, it really has taken a downhill turn because of the leadership there. Yeah.
North Figueroa area is just, they'll come in, they'll clean up, people come back, clean up, come back, clean up, come back. MacArthur Park, perfect example. Eunices Hernandez did not act until she was embarrassed into acting because she was forced to help clean up MacArthur Park. And
it took a series of LA Times exposés and articles, and Steve Lopez doing a good job of going there, and the Langer's Deli owner going public, right? So another takeaway. So you can either, if you can't beat them at the ballot box or the courthouse, you got to embarrass them in the press, right?
The court of public opinion.
That's that. Yeah. So to Paul, let's hypothetically, receiver comes in. What would a receiver be able to do, for example, in MacArthur Park? Would that be within the jurisdiction, and what tools would he or she have as a receiver to?
That remains to be seen. So that's some uncharted water yet. We're going to have to negotiate our way and really, because there's issues of jurisdiction, there's issues of what the federal court can actually, do. Does the federal court have jurisdiction to, cause the city to enforce these encampments? We just don't know yet. So,
and what's your take on LAHSA? Are we better off with LAHSA reformed, better off scrapping it? And if we scrap it,
what comes in its place?
What comes in its place? Is it just the city and the county contracting directly with vendors, and do we end up in the same place?
So on the national level, and this is because LAHSA is an interesting animal because it's not only a continuum of care that receives federal dollars through the federal continuum of care program that addresses homelessness. It receives state dollars, city dollars, county dollars. Okay. My perspective is that we have 430 some odd continuums of care across the country that receive federal money. These entities are unelected, they're unaccountable, they're run by NGOs in order to receive money from the federal government to give to their friends in other NGOs. That whole scheme needs to be scrapped because it reeks of corruption and favoritism. There's no outcome measures, there's no metrics of success. It is just, I call the continuum of care program essentially a cartel because they're bringing in money, they're talking to their friends and pals in the nonprofits, and they have the ability to set essentially price and supply for the housing interventions that are out there. So it's a cartel system. It needs to go away.
Paul, we see it also in the construction side of this entire equation as well. So my background is I'm an apartment builder. And as been noted many, many, many times, I think the average cost for permanent supportive housing in LA is about $850,000 per unit, which is insane. I think anybody who owns a home or has looked at a home or anything anywhere in the country would admit that's lunacy. And I remember going into a Triple H oversight committee meeting after it was a ballot that was passed, ballot initiative that was passed by the voters. And I remember there were 4 union reps that came in, construction union reps. And without any public comment, without anything, the city council people on the committee basically voted to require that all housing built under Triple H must be done with 100% union labor. Yeah. Tell me that that's not a giveaway. I don't know. It's just, you see kind of the people who are there firsthand, looking at it face to face, you really can see the level to which this has become sort of an industry, the homelessness industry, the homelessness industrial complex, as we often say.
So the question is, if LAHSA were to go away, if instead the federal government took their money and like so many other things said, look, states, you deal with homelessness the best way that you know how to deal with homelessness, at least there would be that level of accountability from the state and the federal government. State of California, last year in Sacramento, it was announced that $24 billion of state money designated for people experiencing homelessness, they had no clue where it had gone over the last 5 years. So state accountability is an issue. This is the problem. So county accountability. They've taken $300 million away from LAHSA. What that means is that there's, that much less. You've got this investigation by the United States Attorney that's going to be looking at cases of waste and fraud and abuse for these dollars. I think it's incumbent on the federal government to step in and say, we need to right size and we need to hold these programs accountable and these providers accountable to outcome measures, to metrics. Because the thing that's crazy, this is the thing that's crazy. So HUD requires every organization like LAHSA, every continuum of care, to conduct a point-in-time count, right? We hear these great pronouncements, and it's just been a little crazy about how when LAHSA's in trouble, they decide to release these early numbers about how, we're seeing a decrease. It's kind of like, I feel like when my kids were little and they said, "Don't punish me, Dad. I really did clean my room," when all they did was they took all the stuff off the floor and threw it in the closet. This is what I feel like. So we have this point in time count that you can look at. It's public information. You can go to the HUD Exchange website, look up continuum of care point in time count reports. They just keep going up and up and up. You might have these times where it flattens a little bit, but they just go up and up and up. How come we can't connect the point in time count, the only metric that measures homelessness in a community, with the performance of the organizations that are getting paid hundreds of millions of dollars to reduce that number?
Yep.
So this whole system needs to be radically scrapped and transformed. I think receivership is part of that. I think what's happening with the U.S. Attorney's Office is a part of that. I think what the federal government through HUD, in terms of the reforms that I'm aware of going on in terms of the continuum of care program, I think they're a part of that. I think I don't know if you could say this in Los Angeles, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the DOGE effort to hold NGOs accountable for the taxpayer money that is given to them. You may disagree with a lot of stuff, but I would press people to disagree with holding programs accountable with federal money that have resulted in the number of deaths that we've seen in Los Angeles of people experiencing homelessness living on the streets.
Paul, I think that to that effect, us in LA, I think we've always been a community that's willing to spend on services, that's willing to spend for quality of life issues, to help our neighbors, right? To sort of promote the ideals of Angelenos. But we want, as you mentioned, some level of accountability for that, right? We're willing to spend the money, we're willing to pay the taxes, right? But we want to get something for our money. And I think that's kind of the common thread here.
Yeah.
And we're at the point now where it's not about more money, right? It's about how we use it. And frankly, there is no capacity for more money. The city is on the verge of insolvency with $1 billion deficit. The county's facing a massive period of financial strain due to its recent settlement of sexual assault claims. So now
even the state,
right, and the state is once had a surplus and now is a major deficit, and no one's going to get bailed out by the federal government, even if we wanted to. So it's a question of how do we use the resources that we have, and I think it's. We've spoken high level a lot. I do want to. We're short on time, but I did want to focus on some of the causes of the inflow into homelessness and hear your thoughts of perhaps ways to address it or programs that are happening elsewhere in the state or country that are working. We know that there's an aspect of homelessness that's a housing crisis, right? There's vulnerable tenants falling to homelessness. We know foster youth are falling to homelessness at a disproportionate number. We know that there's an inflow to Los Angeles from around the state and the country. And there are some programs where there's family reunification programs where folks are invited back to where they're from. Are there programs that Los Angeles can replicate that others are doing? Because just throwing more money at this is not going to solve the problems. We need really smart programs with metrics that are met and create some incentives for them to actually work, right?
That's a great question, Sam. And I'm aware of homelessness programs. I follow homelessness statistics for communities all across the country. I'm involved with legislative efforts in other states. It's going on and some here in California. And I make kind of a joke and kind of facetious about it. I say, look, I don't care what your program is. I don't care if you go in front of a homeless encampment with a smudge of sage and you wave it around and you do an incantation. If it works to reduce the number of people that are suffering and dying on the streets, I'm going to support it. I don't care what it is. If you can show me that the numbers are going down, I'm all about it. So the issue isn't necessarily finding the perfect program. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is creating the right structures and incentives and data collection and reporting that's transparent, so that people know that when they give money through taxes or through their own charitable contributions, that is going to reduce the number of people on the street. And these are not esoteric, unattainable numbers. This is something that you can do very easily with a mobile phone and an app and a group of business improvement district ambassadors. Do we have more people sleeping on our streets in our bid this week than we did last week? If so, what happened? And so, to your point, whether it's family reunification, in my view, I think what's happening nationally, and this is classic economics, right? When you incentivize something, you get more of it. When you have basically created this permissive society that says you can do whatever you want with impunity on the streets, and you will suffer no consequences for it, then you're going to get more of that. And I'll just use another analogy. We don't have to talk about people experiencing homelessness, living in tents and squalor on the streets. Let's talk about what Prop 36, one of the things that Prop 36 really tried to deal with, and that is smash and grab theft. So why does smash and grab theft occur, and why has it proliferated? Because district attorneys have had their hands tied in terms of going after and making it harder for smash and grab thieves to benefit. It's an incentive structure. If I can get away with it, then I'm going to go and do it. Definitely. And it's the same thing. We have a very permissive, whether it's the city or the state. I'm working in other states where we're doing interesting policy to prohibit public camping. Why? People freak out. They go, oh, you're criminalizing homelessness. In Kentucky, last year, they passed a statewide camping ban. You're not allowed to camp on public land anywhere in the state of Kentucky. And so the people opposed to this, they freaked out. You're going to criminalize homelessness. Well, the data is in for the first 6 months of the program in the state of Kentucky, all across Kentucky. Law enforcement officers engaged with 1,700 people on the street that were in violation of the camping ban. They engaged them. And they said, look, it's not illegal to be homeless, but you can't be homeless here. Here's where the shelter is. Here's where the services are. But if I come back and you're here again, you're going to be guilty of a misdemeanor, and then we'll have to take it from there. So after 6 months, after 1,700 engagements, the number of people that were actually arrested for violating the camping ban was 5.
Wow. In the state.
That is a far cry from criminalizing all people that are experiencing homelessness. And why did those people get arrested? They didn't get arrested because they were nice and they said, I'm sorry, Mr. Officer, I just have no place to live. Please let me live here on this. No, they were combative. They constantly refused. They didn't want to accept the help that were offered. So just like Matt Mahan in San Jose, we're seeing communities start saying, look, we can't go down this path anymore. We need to create negative incentives. We need to support enforcement in order to discontinue this permissive nature of people taking advantage of public spaces and the compassion of the community. And we know that when you engage people, and you don't give them the wiggle room to do what they want, they will go elsewhere. They will go to shelters. They will seek the help that they need.
Just want to make sure we heard that right.
Okay.
In the state of Kentucky,
the entire state,
after the passage of a statewide anti-camping ban, there were 1,700 engagements with law enforcement statewide the entire year, resulting in only 5 arrests.
That's right. That's over 6 months. Over 6 months. Right.
And how much money did it cost?
Yeah. The good news is that we know in today's society, there's lots of things that are being cast. People are being castigated. People are saying, oh, you hate homeless people. No, we don't hate homeless people. We didn't sue the city and the county of Los Angeles because we hated homeless people. We hated the impacts that the city and the county allowed to happen because they didn't love and didn't show compassion to homeless people enough. That's the real issue. The real issue, if the city government and the county government was actually doing the things, providing the basic level of services in terms of clearing, making sure that rights of way are cleared. We're smart enough people to negotiate and say, look, I know the difference between somebody who has a mental health condition, who's high on methamphetamine and fentanyl. Those people need help. We're smart enough, we're sophisticated enough to understand that. We're also smart enough and sophisticated enough to know when a guy just constantly is telling a story because they want to take advantage. We know that. Now, those guys need help too.
Compare the paragraph that you just shared, or even the hour that we've been just discussing, with the simple slogan of criminalizing homelessness or criminalizing poverty, or you hate homeless people. And the latter, these words, these slogans, are able to shift public policy and divest our leaders from the courage to do the right thing
and perpetuate the system that we've just been
and make it worse
and
cement it with a sense of permanence. That, you know, my couple takeaways from our discussion, Paul, which I really appreciate, and I appreciate your work as well, is that if you wanted to design a system to not solve a really important problem, you would design the Los Angeles homelessness system.
Definitely.
Second is, for too long, Angelenos assumed that the people we elected and the money that that we've invested from our own pockets would be used the right way to help people, and that's not happening. Right, left to their own devices, the system is getting worse, and money is disappearing, and people are dying. And to our listeners, if you appreciate this conversation, we urge you to subscribe, to share it, to get involved with the LA Alliance, get involved with Thrive, because in our separate ways, whether LA Alliance through the court system and Thrive through grassroots organizing and political engagement, it's incumbent on us to force our leaders to do the right thing, hold them accountable, and if they won't, it's time for them to be replaced with people who will. So we're short on time, but I did want to give you, Paul, the last word, because you're doing God's work and saving people's lives. You're shining a light on a broken system where money's missing and people are suffering, and it doesn't have to be this way.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Ryan. My last parting words are for the people who are listening and watching this podcast. It's time to get engaged and involved. All the information is out there. If you want to read the audit report, go to la-alliance.org. It's on our main page. Just scroll down. You can see the audit report for yourself. All you have to, there's so many good press outlets. I have to commend like Nick Gerda with LAist doing a lot of great work in the media. I've got to commend folks like the West Side Current, Jamie Page and Tim Campbell for really talking about what's going on the street level. There's a lot of good information out there. The thing is that we need to cultivate, we need to encourage. If people need to have their hair on fire, and they need to stop being patronized by their city council members who are satisfied with sitting on their hands and not being leaders and not taking aggressive action, because by not taking aggressive action, our communities are suffering, our businesses are suffering, and the worst part is vulnerable people on the street are suffering and dying in ways that people can't even imagine. So I get passionate, I get engaged, but at the end of the day, the humanitarian crisis that is affecting our cities and our counties has a solution, And it's the engagement of citizens to put the right leaders in place that are actually going to act on this to address this problem and reduce the suffering that's on the streets.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's been such a great conversation, and we'll continue the conversation here and in other forums. And, thank you so much for uncovering all this scandalous bombshell reporting. And we look forward to engaging with you soon. So,
thank you, Paul.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
And if you appreciated today's podcast, we urge you to subscribe and share with others, because together we can make a big difference in Los Angeles.
Thanks for listening to Common Sense Citizen, where everyday Angelinos and policy experts come together to shape LA's future. If you found today's conversation valuable, subscribe and leave a review, and share it with a friend. Stay connected with Thrive LA on social media for the latest updates. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and keep fighting for a better LA.